Fear is the first and only certainty. It lives in the body before it forms into thought, tightening muscles, shortening breath, training eyes to drop to the ground before they dare to look up. For those gathered in this moment, fear has been rehearsed for years, perfected through repetition. It is no longer a reaction but a state of being, an instinct as natural as hunger. The presence of guards does not need explanation. Uniforms alone are enough to trigger submission. Authority has always arrived with violence, and survival has depended on anticipating it. Every movement is calculated, every sound weighed against potential punishment. Even silence carries risk. In this world, fear is not irrational, it is learned. The prisoners stand clustered together, bodies angled inward as if trying to disappear into themselves. Their posture reflects a history written into bone and muscle, shaped by countless encounters where standing too straight invited notice and notice invited pain. Eyes avoid contact, not out of shame, but strategy. To be seen has meant to be selected, and selection has rarely ended well. The guards nearby may not yet have acted, but action is assumed. Experience has taught them that cruelty does not announce itself, it waits. The space they occupy feels temporary, unstable, as if violence is simply delayed rather than absent. Memory weighs heavily here. The past is not distant. It presses forward, overlapping the present until the two are almost indistinguishable. Camps, marches, interrogations, shouted orders, blows delivered without reason or restraint. These memories do not appear as complete images but as fragments. The sound of boots, the snap of commands, the sudden silence after someone falls. The mind has learned to protect itself by narrowing focus, by refusing to imagine anything beyond the next moment. Hope, when it once appeared, proved dangerous. Those who believed too early often suffered more deeply when belief was punished. Over time, hope was trained out, replaced by caution and emotional withdrawal. The guards in front of them represent continuity rather than change. Liberation, if it exists at all, is an abstract concept, spoken of in whispers, stripped of detail. Rumors have circulated before, each one ending in disappointment or worse. The prisoners have learned not to trust transitions. A new uniform does not necessarily mean a new reality. Power, in their experience, simply changes hands while methods remain the same. The expectation is not freedom, but a reordering of control. Fear prepares them for this possibility, reinforcing the instinct to submit quickly and completely. The environment itself reinforces uncertainty. This is not yet a place of safety, but a threshold, an in-between space where rules are unclear. Structures that once symbolized imprisonment still loom nearby, casting long shadows over the ground. The air feels heavy with anticipation, as though the world is holding its breath. Every sound is amplified, every movement scrutinized. Time stretches, slowed by anxiety, making seconds feel like minutes. The prisoners do not speak unless absolutely necessary, conserving energy and avoiding attention. They wait because waiting has become synonymous with survival. Inside, a conflict unfolds quietly. Part of the mind recognizes that something is different. There is no immediate shouting, no immediate violence. But this recognition is fragile and easily overridden by conditioning. The absence of pain does not yet register as safety. It registers as suspense. Fear adapts, reshaping itself to fill the gap left by uncertainty. It whispers that this calm is a tactic, that restraint may precede something worse. Trust, once broken repeatedly, does not rebuild itself without resistance. The guard's presence triggers rehearsed responses. Hands remain visible, movements slow and deliberate. Any instinct toward curiosity is suppressed. Looking too closely has always been dangerous. Even breathing feels monitored, as if excess visibility could invite punishment. Bodies remain tense, prepared to absorb impact, prepared to obey. The prisoners have learned that compliance does not guarantee safety, but resistance guarantees harm. In this calculation, fear is logical, even necessary. Yet beneath the surface, exhaustion competes with fear. Years of vigilance have drained emotional reserves, leaving behind a numbness that dulls reaction. Some prisoners feel detached, observing themselves from a distance, as if this moment is happening to someone else. This dissociation has been a survival mechanism, allowing them to endure what could not be processed fully at the time. Now, in this pause, the numbness lingers, blunting both terror and curiosity. It is easier not to feel than to risk disappointment. There is also grief, unspoken and unresolved. Grief for those who are missing, for lives interrupted, for versions of themselves that no longer exist. This grief sits quietly behind fear, occasionally surfacing as a tightening in the chest or a sudden wave of fatigue. The present moment cannot be separated from what has already been lost. Any future, if it exists, feels abstract and unreachable. The prisoners do not yet allow themselves to imagine it. The guards remain watchful, their authority undeniable, and this alone is enough to maintain fear. Power has always been asymmetrical here, and even without overt cruelty, imbalance persists. The prisoners understand hierarchy intimately. It has defined every interaction for years. To exist beneath power is to anticipate its misuse. Even neutral expressions are interpreted cautiously, analyzed for signs of intent. A lack of expression does not reassure. It confuses. In this moment, fear is not dramatic. It does not manifest as panic or chaos. It is controlled, disciplined, shaped by experience. It exists in stillness, in restraint, in the careful management of self. This fear has allowed survival, but it has also narrowed life to its most basic function. The prisoners are alive, but they are not yet living. They are present, but not participating. Their world has been reduced to endurance. The expectation of pain is so ingrained that its absence feels like an error. The mind searches for explanation, unable to accept that cruelty might not follow. This search keeps fear active, refusing to let it dissipate. To relax would be to risk vulnerability, and vulnerability has always been punished. Even if something has changed, the prisoners do not yet know how to exist without fear guiding every decision. This is the emotional landscape at the beginning. A room full of people who have survived by expecting the worst, now confronted with uncertainty rather than immediate harm. The guards stand as symbols of authority, and authority has never meant mercy. Whatever happens next will challenge this belief, but for now, fear remains dominant. It holds the past and present together, shaping perception, behavior, and expectation. In this moment, nothing has yet been undone. The prisoners cower not because they are weak, but because fear has taught them that staying small is the safest way to remain alive. The shift begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, and that subtlety is what makes it so unsettling. The guards do not shout. No blows follow their arrival. There is no sudden eruption of violence to confirm what the prisoners have been conditioned to expect. Instead, there is restraint, measured movement, controlled gestures, a calm that feels deliberate rather than accidental. For men and women who have learned to read danger in every sound and posture, this calm is not comforting. It is disorienting. Silence, once a prelude to punishment, now stretches without consequence, and that absence demands explanation. The guards' discipline expresses itself differently from anything the prisoners have known. Orders, when given, are functional rather than cruel, stripped of insult or humiliation. Authority is present, unmistakable, but it is not weaponized through fear. This distinction is difficult to process. The prisoners watch closely, scanning faces for signs of contempt, waiting for the moment when restraint will give way to familiar brutality. Their bodies remain tense, prepared for impact that never comes. Muscles ache from holding themselves ready, from refusing to relax even when nothing happens. Confusion spreads through the group, though it remains unspoken. Whispered interpretations feel too dangerous, so each person conducts their own silent analysis. The guard's behavior does not fit the established pattern, and this mismatch unsettles deeply ingrained assumptions. Power, in their experience, has always asserted itself through dominance. Kindness, if it appeared at all, was conditional and temporary, often a prelude to manipulation or betrayal. The prisoners have learned to distrust anomalies. When cruelty pauses, it has usually done so only to recalibrate. The lack of spectacle is particularly jarring. Liberation, if imagined at all, was expected to arrive with noise, celebration, chaos, or vengeance. Instead, the moment unfolds with procedural calm. The guards move with purpose but not aggression, enforcing order without humiliation. This restraint does not register as mercy yet, it registers as ambiguity. The prisoners cannot tell whether this is a test, a strategy, or simply an unfamiliar form of control. Uncertainty becomes its own source of anxiety. Years of dehumanization have shaped how the prisoners interpret every interaction. They are accustomed to being treated as objects, problems to be managed rather than people to be acknowledged. Now, they notice something strange. They are not being ignored, but neither are they being targeted. The guards acknowledge their presence without hostility, without the performative cruelty that once defined authority. This neutrality feels unnatural, almost threatening in its unpredictability. The prisoners struggle to reconcile this behavior with memory. Every past encounter with power has reinforced the same lesson: authority exists to dominate. The absence of immediate violence does not erase that lesson. It challenges it, and challenges are destabilizing. The mind searches for precedent, for some historical example that might explain what is happening, but none fits cleanly. This moment does not resemble surrender, nor does it resemble captivity as they know it. It occupies an unfamiliar moral space. Small details begin to accumulate, though none are dramatic enough to force immediate belief. A guard waits instead of striking. Another gestures rather than shouts. These actions, insignificant in isolation, gather weight through repetition. Still, the prisoners remain cautious. Trauma has taught them that patterns matter more than moments, and it is too early to identify a pattern. Trust requires consistency, and consistency has been absent for too long. The prisoners' internal defenses remain intact. They do not meet the guards' eyes. They do not speak unless spoken to. Emotional distance is maintained deliberately, a buffer against disappointment. To feel hope would be to risk its loss, and loss has already taken so much. Even confusion is preferable to optimism, because confusion does not demand emotional investment. The guards themselves seem aware of the tension. Their movements are precise, their posture disciplined, suggesting control without aggression. They enforce boundaries, but those boundaries are clear and predictable. Predictability, even without kindness, is a departure from the arbitrary cruelty the prisoners have endured. This predictability introduces a subtle shift. Fear begins to share space with vigilance rather than overwhelming it completely. Still, vigilance remains dominant. The prisoners assume that restraint has limits. They expect that patience will wear thin, that humanity will give way to habit. Power, after all, has corrupted every authority they have encountered so far. The idea that these guards might be different feels implausible, almost dangerous to consider. Belief, once punished, has been locked away for protection. The environment continues to reinforce uncertainty. Structures associated with confinement still stand, and their presence anchors memory in the present. The prisoners cannot separate what they see now from what they have seen before. Physical surroundings carry emotional residue, and that residue amplifies suspicion. Even if behavior changes, the setting itself resists reinterpretation. As time passes without incident, tension does not disappear, it transforms. Fear no longer spikes in anticipation of immediate harm, but it lingers as a low, constant hum. The prisoners remain braced, unsure whether this calm represents safety or merely a delay. Their bodies respond to this prolonged uncertainty with fatigue, but rest feels unsafe. To lower defenses would be to invite vulnerability. This moment forces the prisoners into an unfamiliar psychological position. They are no longer reacting solely to cruelty, but to its absence. The skills that once ensured survival, anticipating blows, reading rage, submitting quickly, offer little guidance here. The lack of cruelty leaves them without a script, and that absence creates unease. They do not yet know how to behave in a world where authority does not immediately harm. The guard's restraint begins to challenge the prisoner's understanding of power itself. Authority without cruelty feels incomplete, as though something essential is missing. This challenge is not welcomed. It destabilizes the internal logic that has made suffering intelligible. If power does not require brutality, then the past becomes harder to justify, harder to contain. The prisoners are not ready to confront that implication yet. For now, they remain suspended between fear and disbelief. The guards have not earned trust, but they have disrupted certainty. That disruption is subtle, but it is enough to mark a transition. Something has changed, though no one dares to name it. The prisoners continue to wait, but the waiting feels different now. It is no longer solely a strategy for survival. It has become a test of interpretation. In this quiet, controlled moment, the foundations of fear begin to shift, not collapsing, but loosening, just enough to make room for something unfamiliar and unsettling. The possibility that this authority might not behave as expected. Change does not arrive as a single, decisive moment. It unfolds through small, almost mundane actions that would have gone unnoticed in another context, but here they carry immense weight. The guards begin to perform tasks that contradict everything the prisoners have learned to expect. Food appears, not thrown or rationed with cruelty, but distributed carefully, with attention paid to fairness and need. Medical supplies follow, offered without interrogation or punishment. These gestures are practical, even restrained, yet they reverberate deeply because they violate the rules that have governed the prisoner's reality for so long. At first, these actions are met with suspicion rather than relief. The prisoners accept what is given, but they do so cautiously, as though any sign of eagerness might later be used against them. Hands tremble not only from hunger or weakness, but from uncertainty. In the past, food has been used as leverage, medicine as a reward or a tool of control. Here, there is no visible exchange, no demand attached. The absence of conditions feels unnatural, almost illogical, and the prisoners struggle to understand it. The guards' behavior remains consistent. There is no mockery, no sudden withdrawal of generosity to reinforce dominance. Each action seems guided by procedure rather than impulse, by responsibility rather than cruelty. This consistency begins to erode the prisoners' most deeply held assumptions. Trauma has taught them that kindness is unstable, fleeting, and often deceptive. Yet repetition challenges that lesson. When food continues to arrive without punishment, when aid is offered again and again without cost, disbelief slowly gives way to confusion, and confusion begins to crack the armor of fear. The prisoners' bodies respond before their minds do. Shoulders lower slightly. Breathing deepens, just enough to notice the difference. Some feel the ache of hunger more sharply now that it is being addressed, as though the body is emerging from survival mode and rediscovering sensation. Others feel waves of exhaustion, the kind that arrives when vigilance finally loosens its grip. These physical responses are unsettling in their own way. To feel is to risk, and risk has always carried consequences. Still, fear does not vanish. It adapts. The prisoners watch closely for inconsistency, for the moment when this strange benevolence will reveal its true purpose. They remind themselves that power can change tactics without changing intent. Yet each passing hour without reprisal makes that explanation harder to sustain. The guards do not exploit gratitude. They do not demand submission beyond what is necessary to maintain order. Authority remains, but it is exercised without spectacle. What unsettles the prisoners most is not what the guards do, but how they do it. There is an absence of contempt in their movements, a lack of the casual cruelty that once permeated every interaction. The prisoners are not addressed as problems to be managed, but as people whose immediate needs matter. This recognition, however quiet, carries enormous emotional weight. It challenges the internalized belief that suffering is inevitable, that dignity is a luxury reserved for others. As these small actions accumulate, they begin to alter the emotional climate. The air feels different, less heavy with dread. Conversations among the prisoners remain hushed, but they shift in tone. Instead of speculating about punishment, some begin to ask cautious questions about what this behavior might mean. No one speaks of hope outright. The word feels too fragile, too dangerous. But the idea begins to form in the margins of thought, unspoken yet persistent. The guards' humanity becomes evident not through grand gestures, but through restraint. They enforce boundaries without humiliation, maintain order without violence. When rules are explained, they are explained plainly without threats. This clarity is disorienting. For years, rules were arbitrary, designed to confuse and dominate. Now, predictability introduces a sense of stability that the prisoners have not experienced in a long time. This stability forces a reckoning with memory. The prisoners begin to realize how thoroughly cruelty has shaped their understanding of the world. The contrast between past and present becomes impossible to ignore. Each act of care highlights the absence of care that defined their earlier captivity. This realization brings not only relief, but grief. Grief for the suffering that was endured unnecessarily, for lives lost under authorities who chose brutality when restraint was possible. Some prisoners respond to this realization with anger, others with withdrawal. Emotions long suppressed begin to surface, unevenly and without warning. The guards do not react to these responses with punishment. They allow space for confusion, for hesitation, for silence. This tolerance is itself a form of humanity, one that acknowledges trauma without demanding immediate recovery. Trust does not emerge fully formed. It develops in fragments, tentative and fragile. A prisoner dares to look up when addressed. Another speaks without trembling. These moments are small, easily overlooked, but they represent a profound shift. Fear no longer dictates every interaction. It still exists, but it no longer holds absolute authority. The prisoners begin to notice the guards as individuals rather than symbols. This is a dangerous transition, one that feels like betrayal of past lessons. To humanize authority has always led to disappointment before. Yet the guards' behavior resists simplification. They are neither saviors nor tyrants. They are professionals operating within a moral framework that prioritizes responsibility over domination. This nuance is difficult to process after years of moral extremes. As days pass, the rhythm of care continues. Food, medical attention, clear communication. The absence of cruelty becomes a pattern rather than an exception. Patterns matter. They shape expectation, and expectation shapes emotion. Slowly, fear begins to share space with something else. Not joy, not relief, but a cautious sense of safety. This safety feels unfamiliar, almost unreal, and some prisoners resist it instinctively, waiting for it to be taken away. The guard's consistency becomes transformative precisely because it does not demand gratitude or recognition. There are no speeches, no declarations of moral superiority. Humanity is expressed through action, repeated quietly and without fanfare. This humility deepens its impact. It suggests that decency is not a performance, but a standard. For the prisoners, this realization is both comforting and destabilizing. If authority can be exercised without cruelty, then cruelty was never inevitable. This implication forces them to confront the meaning of their past suffering. It raises questions that have no easy answers, questions about choice, responsibility, and the nature of power. These questions linger, heavy and unresolved. Yet in the midst of this moral reckoning, something fundamental begins to shift. The prisoners start to imagine themselves as participants in the world again, not merely survivors within it. This imagination is tentative, fragile, but it exists. It manifests in small ways. A shared glance, a whispered observation, a moment of stillness unburdened by dread. The shock, then, is not dramatic. It is cumulative. It builds through repetition, through the steady refusal of cruelty where cruelty was expected. British humanity does not announce itself. It reveals itself through reliability. For people whose lives have been defined by unpredictability and fear, this reliability is revolutionary. By the end of this phase, the prisoners are no longer simply enduring the present. They are beginning, cautiously, to inhabit it. Fear has not disappeared, but it no longer governs every thought. In its place, something quieter takes root, the recognition that dignity, once stripped away, can be returned not through grand gestures, but through the simple, persistent act of treating people as human beings. As the initial shock settles, a deeper and more unsettling realization begins to take hold. The prisoners are no longer reacting solely to external changes. They are confronting an internal transformation they did not anticipate and are not fully prepared to face. Being treated with humanity forces a reckoning that goes far beyond physical safety. It compels them to recognize how thoroughly cruelty had reshaped their understanding of themselves, of authority, and of the world. The return of dignity is not a simple relief, it is a disturbance, one that exposes wounds long sealed by necessity. For years, survival depended on emotional compression. Feelings were narrowed, flattened, reduced to what was strictly necessary to endure the next hour or day. Now, as fear loosens its grip, emotions begin to expand again, often painfully. The realization that they are being treated as people, not prisoners, not enemies, not expendable bodies, creates a strange sense of vertigo. Humanity, once denied, now feels almost overwhelming. Some struggle to accept it, as though acknowledging it might unravel the fragile balance that kept them alive. Grief rises to the surface with unexpected force. It had always been there, contained and controlled, but dignity gives it room to breathe. Memories of those who did not survive return with clarity and weight. The contrast between what is happening now and what happened before sharpens the pain of loss. If compassion was possible all along, then the suffering endured under previous authorities feels even more senseless, more brutal in retrospect. This awareness does not bring closure, it deepens mourning. The prisoners begin to understand that cruelty was not merely something done to them, it was something that altered how they saw themselves. Years of degradation had convinced many that they deserved no better, that their suffering reflected some inherent worthlessness. Now, being treated with care challenges that belief, and the challenge is destabilizing. To accept dignity is to acknowledge that the past injustice was real and undeserved. This acknowledgement brings anger alongside sorrow, an anger that has nowhere obvious to go. Some prisoners resist this internal shift, clinging to emotional distance as a form of self-protection. They remain guarded, skeptical, unwilling to let kindness penetrate too deeply. Others find themselves unexpectedly vulnerable, emotions breaking through without warning. Tears come suddenly, often triggered by small gestures. A clean bandage, a patient explanation, a moment of quiet respect. These reactions feel embarrassing to some, frightening to others. Emotional expression had once been dangerous, now it feels unfamiliar and uncontrolled. The British presence continues to act as a stabilizing force, not by intervening in these internal struggles, but by refusing to exploit them. There is no demand for gratitude, no pressure to perform relief or happiness. The guards allow the prisoners to move at their own pace, to process what is happening without interference. This patience reinforces the moral shift underway. Authority remains firm, but it does not intrude upon emotional recovery. As dignity is slowly restored, the prisoners begin to see themselves differently. Posture changes subtly. Some stand a little straighter, not out of defiance, but because they no longer feel compelled to shrink. Others begin to speak more freely, testing their voices in a world where words are not immediately punished. These changes are tentative and uneven, but they mark a profound transition. The internal logic of fear, once absolute, is losing its authority. This transformation forces a re-evaluation of the past. The prisoners begin to reflect on how normalized cruelty had become, how it was accepted as an inevitable feature of power. The British example disrupts that narrative. It demonstrates that authority can exist without dehumanization, that control does not require humiliation. This realization is unsettling because it exposes the moral bankruptcy of those who chose cruelty when alternatives existed. Yet this awareness does not bring immediate clarity or peace. Instead, it creates moral dissonance. The prisoners grapple with questions that have no easy answers. Why were they subjected to such brutality? Why were others spared? Why did kindness arrive only after so much was lost? These questions linger, unanswered, complicating the process of healing. Humanity, once restored, demands meaning, and meaning is difficult to reconstruct amid devastation. The sense of time also begins to shift. Survival mode had compressed existence into an endless present, where the future was irrelevant and the past too painful to confront. Now, with fear receding, time expands again. The prisoners begin to think about what comes next, even if only in abstract terms. The idea of a future feels both hopeful and terrifying. Hope implies possibility, and possibility implies responsibility, to live, to choose, to rebuild. Some prisoners struggle with guilt as this future begins to take shape. Survival itself feels heavy, especially in the absence of those who did not make it. Being treated with kindness intensifies this guilt, making survival feel less like endurance and more like an obligation. The return of dignity brings with it the burden of memory, of carrying forward the stories of those who are gone. The guards' continued consistency provides a quiet anchor amid this emotional turbulence. Their behavior does not change in response to the prisoners' internal struggles. They neither rush the process nor attempt to manage it. This restraint reinforces a crucial message. Humanity is not conditional on emotional readiness or performance. It exists regardless of how the prisoners respond. Gradually, the prisoners begin to internalize this message. Dignity stops feeling like a temporary allowance and starts to feel like a right. This shift is subtle but transformative. It alters how they interpret interactions, how they understand themselves, and how they imagine their place in the world beyond captivity. Fear no longer defines identity. It becomes a memory rather than a governing force. The moral reversal reaches its deepest point here, not in external action but in internal recognition. The prisoners see, perhaps for the first time in years, that cruelty is a choice, not an inevitability. This recognition is painful, but it is also empowering. It reframes their suffering without diminishing it, placing responsibility where it belongs. By the end of this stage, the prisoners are no longer simply responding to kindness. They are beginning to absorb it. Humanity, once shocking, becomes a reference point against which all else is measured. Trauma remains, grief remains, but they exist alongside a renewed sense of worth. The guard's presence has not erased the past, but it has interrupted its authority. In that interruption, something essential is reclaimed: the understanding that even after systematic dehumanization, dignity can return, and with it, the painful, necessary work of becoming fully human again. As physical safety becomes more secure, a new and unexpected struggle emerges. Survival is no longer the only concern, and in the space left behind, unresolved wounds begin to surface with greater intensity. The prisoners find that safety does not immediately bring peace. Instead, it exposes everything that had been suppressed to endure captivity. The body may be free from immediate threat, but the mind remains conditioned by years of fear, suspicion, and loss. Recovery, it becomes clear, is not a single event but a complicated and often painful process. Many prisoners discover that they do not know how to exist without constant vigilance. The habits that once protected them now feel like obstacles. Sleep is restless, interrupted by memories that refuse to remain in the past. Loud noises still provoke reflexive fear. Sudden movements trigger instinctive withdrawal. These responses persist even in the absence of danger, reminders that trauma does not disappear simply because circumstances change. Safety feels fragile, as though it could vanish at any moment. The British Guards remain steady throughout this period, offering structure without coercion. Their consistency becomes a quiet reassurance, even when trust has not fully formed. They maintain order, distribute supplies, and enforce rules with the same calm precision as before. There is no shift toward impatience or authority hardened by fatigue. This steadiness is crucial because it provides something the prisoners have rarely experienced: reliability. Not kindness that fluctuates with mood or advantage, but behavior that remains predictable regardless of response. Yet predictability alone does not resolve inner conflict. Some prisoners struggle deeply with the idea of accepting care. Years of deprivation have taught them to associate dependence with danger. To rely on anyone feels risky, even humiliating. Accepting food, medical treatment, or guidance can provoke shame as much as relief. The internal voice shaped by cruelty insists that survival must be earned through suffering. Kindness without cost challenges that belief, and the challenge can feel unbearable. Others experience anger as recovery begins. With fear no longer dominating every moment, suppressed rage finds room to emerge. This anger is complex, directed not only at former oppressors but at the injustice of having lost so much time, so many lives, so many possibilities. Some feel anger toward themselves for surviving when others did not. This emotional turbulence has no clear outlet, and without guidance, it can feel overwhelming. The guards do not attempt to manage these emotions. They do not demand gratitude, nor do they expect emotional stability. This refusal to impose expectations is itself transformative. Authority, for once, does not seek to control inner experience. It allows grief, anger, confusion, and silence to coexist without consequence. This space, though uncomfortable, becomes essential for genuine recovery. As days pass, small routines begin to form. Meals occur at regular times. Medical checkups follow predictable schedules. Information is shared openly, without deception. These routines help anchor the prisoners in the present. Structure, once a tool of domination, becomes a framework for stability. The difference lies not in the existence of rules, but in their purpose. They no longer serve to dehumanize, but to support. Some prisoners begin to test the boundaries of this new reality. They ask questions. They request assistance. These acts feel daring, even rebellious, after years of enforced silence. Each time a request is met without punishment, confidence grows incrementally. Trust remains cautious, but it is no longer unimaginable. The possibility that authority might respond without cruelty begins to feel real. Still, fear does not disappear evenly. Some prisoners remain deeply guarded, convinced that this phase is temporary. They wait for the inevitable reversal, for kindness to be withdrawn as suddenly as it appeared. This expectation shapes their behavior, keeping them emotionally distant. They observe rather than participate, protecting themselves from disappointment. Trauma has taught them that emotional investment invites pain. The guards' continued restraint challenges this belief, but it does not erase it overnight. Healing moves at different speeds for different people. The British presence does not accelerate the process artificially. There is no insistence on optimism or recovery. The guards understand, perhaps intuitively, that trust cannot be commanded. It must be earned through time and consistency. The prisoners also begin to interact with one another differently. Without constant fear of punishment, conversations deepen. Stories are shared cautiously at first, then with greater openness. Shared suffering becomes a point of connection rather than isolation. In these exchanges, the prisoners begin to reconstruct a sense of community that captivity had fractured. This communal healing is uneven, marked by moments of withdrawal and tension, but it represents another step away from pure survival. Guilt remains a persistent presence. Survival, once the sole objective, now carries moral weight. Many prisoners struggle with the question of why they lived when so many did not. Kindness intensifies this guilt by highlighting the value of their lives. Being treated as worthy forces them to confront the responsibility of survival, to remember, to witness, to carry forward what others cannot. This burden is heavy, and it complicates the process of recovery. The guards' behavior continues to model an alternative form of authority. By refusing to exploit vulnerability, they demonstrate that power can coexist with restraint. This example reshapes how prisoners think about leadership, control, and responsibility. It introduces the idea that strength does not require domination, and that discipline does not require cruelty. These lessons resonate deeply, even as they challenge long-held beliefs. As physical health improves, emotional complexity increases. The return of strength brings awareness of loss into sharper focus. Weakness once dulled grief, strength allows it to surface fully. This paradox makes recovery feel counterintuitive. Feeling better physically can make emotional pain more acute. The guards' patience during this phase is critical. They do not interpret emotional distress as failure or ingratitude. They recognize it as part of the process. Gradually, some prisoners begin to imagine a future again. These thoughts are tentative, often fleeting, but they represent a profound shift. The future is no longer an abstract concept reserved for others. It becomes something personal, something possible. This possibility brings both hope and fear. Hope because life might continue with meaning, fear because meaning implies vulnerability. The British presence remains unchanged, offering neither promises nor pressure. This neutrality allows the prisoners to explore these thoughts at their own pace. There is no demand to move on, no insistence that the past be left behind. Recovery is not framed as forgetting, but as learning how to live alongside memory. The true shock of this stage lies in the realization that humanity, once returned, does not fade. It persists through exhaustion, emotional volatility, and uncertainty. The guards do not retreat into cruelty when faced with complexity. They remain consistent, proving that decency is not a fragile ideal but a durable practice. By this point, fear no longer dominates every interaction. It still exists, but it no longer defines identity or expectation. In its place, a fragile sense of agency begins to emerge. The prisoners are no longer merely reacting to circumstances, they are beginning to make choices again, however small. These choices, when to speak, when to rest, when to engage, represent a reclaiming of self. This stage marks a turning point. Recovery is incomplete, and wounds remain deep, but something irreversible has occurred. The prisoners have seen authority exercised without cruelty, and that vision cannot be erased. It reshapes memory and expectation alike. In witnessing consistent humanity, they begin to understand that survival can lead to something more than endurance. It can lead, slowly and painfully, toward rebuilding a life that acknowledges loss without being consumed by it. The final transformation does not arrive with celebration or dramatic closure. It settles gradually, almost quietly, as the prisoners begin to understand that what they have experienced is not temporary mercy, but a lasting moral interruption. The shock that once defined their reactions softens into reflection. Looking back, they realize that the most powerful moment was not liberation itself, but the manner in which it unfolded. British humanity did not announce victory or demand recognition. It simply endured, steady and unremarkable on the surface, yet profound in consequence. Fear, once omnipresent, has not vanished entirely. It lingers in habits, in reflexes, in moments of doubt. But it no longer commands every decision. The prisoners begin to notice the shift in subtle ways. They wake without immediate panic. They move through space without calculating every gesture. Silence no longer feels like a threat. These changes are fragile, uneven, but unmistakable. Fear has lost its monopoly over their inner lives. With this shift comes a deeper awareness of what has been reclaimed. Dignity is no longer something externally granted. It has begun to root itself internally. The prisoners no longer see themselves solely through the lens of suffering. They begin to recognize endurance as strength rather than weakness, survival as meaning rather than accident. This reframing does not erase trauma, but it allows identity to expand beyond it.